All right, everybody, we are back. Welcome back to Changemakers 21. I'm here with Larry Kindbom. Larry, welcome to the show.
Jim, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, it's really funny how these things sometimes happen. When we receive a nomination, we talk to everybody and just see, do they fit what we're looking for? Are they truly a change maker? And you and I had a really long conversation. It ended up being over an hour because the reason why I thought we were talking and you thought we were talking ended up not being the reason why we brought you on here today. So I'm really excited to be speaking with you. But a lot of our audience, unless you're into college football and are familiar with your background, may not know who you are. So can you share a little bit about your story and your background?
Sure. Yeah, I've been the head football coach at Washington University here in St. Louis from 1989 up through 2019 and had retired at the end of that season. And the guy that they hired, lo and behold, was a guy that had played for me and asked me to come back. So after being a head coach, not just here, but back in Ohio for 38 years, I'm now an assistant again and getting to serve young men in my sport in a different way than I have for so long. And I'm absolutely loving being an assistant coach.
That's perfect. And I'm going to, for the sake of time, I'm going to breeze through some of the things that we talked about and get to the point of why we wanted you to be a part of Changemakers 21. And I think, as much as anyone we've ever talked to, Larry, you exemplify what a changemaker is. So it truly is an honor to be talking with you. Now, you've done a lot with athletes and you've done a lot of things to support your community. And I could go through and give the laundry list of that. But what really got me going is you told me a story. And that story led you to a relationship that led you to making a huge impact all around various places in the United States with teams and turning. I don't want to do it a misjustice. So can you first tell the story about you called it the midlife crisis, where you decided you were going to run a marathon?
Sure. Well, that's the story. I just felt at one point in my life that, I really like to have a mission to do something, and decided I was going to run a marathon. My wife was a half marathon runner and had done a marathon herself and convinced me that that was a good thing to do. And I just needed motivation. We all need motivation. So my motivation came for every mile that I would run in my practice that I put a penny in a bottle and try to fill the bottle up with pennies. And then at the time that I ran the marathon, I didn't know how many miles that would be or how many pennies, but I'd find a charity to give that to. And as I was looking through charities that I thought might be worthwhile, I stumbled across this thing called the Jason Foundation, which was about teenage suicide and depression. And at first, just looking for a charity, but all of a sudden becoming very educated on mental health and youth, and even read that 1 in 7.5 college age kids have actually either been greatly depressed or thought of committing suicide. And I thought, there's no way, especially working here at Washington University. We have a very selective group of academic students, athletes that I work with. There's no way that 1 in 7.5 people, 1 in 8 people have thought about suicide or depression. And I asked one of my players, did he think that was true among his age group and his peers? And he looked at me and he said, "Coach, that's probably about right." And I was totally shocked. I've been very much into positive mental attitude my whole life, and just couldn't imagine there being that high of an incidence. And this was back in 2007 of people that had gone through those dark thoughts of that process. So what I did is I said, okay, then that's where my donation's going to go. And I let some of my players know that, hey, you're welcome to join in. You can never put in more than a penny a mile. So if I run 5 miles, you can't put in more than a nickel. But overall, we ended up with $783 or $785 somewhere in there to be able to give them by the time I ran the marathon. But what happened in the process was I educated and became educated in what was going on with today's youth and mental health. And Now, even more than back then, we know that that's such a big issue, but it became a very important part of my life. And I've shared that with our players, and now we've shared that with the community in different ways to be able to educate people and do more than that, be able to help people maybe not get into that position in the first place where they could have those kind of thoughts.
And that's amazing. Larry, you talked about one of the things that you learned being in a team sport environment and how you took that to, I don't want to misquote, but how you took that to, I believe, the high school level and up, and you were instrumental in helping to either create or support the creation or implementation of a program that was designed to take the team sports mindset and translate that in. And you shared some things about kids eating lunch alone. Can you touch on that for just a minute?
Sure. So I connected with Clark Flatt because that was the charity that I had actually looked to first, called the Jason Foundation. And I called him on the phone, didn't know who he was. I just asked, what his role was, and he told me he was the CEO of this foundation. Uh, and I said, well, tell me how you got involved, and found out that the foundation, the name Jason Foundation, Jason was his son. So he was a father who had a son who ended up taking his own life. And Clark decided that he was going to turn his life out of the business world and move into something where he could actually maybe have an impact on lives of young people. So that inspired me even more to say, well, then what can I do? I mean, here's a guy that is going out and speaking to state legislatures and getting to try to change bills pass bills at the state level to be able to have more centers, more health, more ways to educate people about suicide and depression at the teenage level. And what we came to was working with our players, and I had another assistant coach, Dennis Snap, where we decided that, my gosh, we have people here that are going to be able to speak, and students respond to students, high school students respond to college students, high school athletes respond to college athletes. So then, rather than go out and maybe speak at something that I'm not most qualified, we harnessed our talent here at WashU, and each year we'd have several of our players that would put together like a speakers bureau, and we talk with high school teams, sometimes like all the captains at a high school, just various groups. We try to get between 6 and 8 every year, and just not to talk about suicide and depression, because our guys aren't necessarily experts at that either. But the thing that they are experts at is team building. They've been part of teams. And how cool would it be if we could talk with a group of people at the high school level and challenge that group of people to take into their school a team building kind of an effort? How can we turn our high school into a team so that when we walk in the cafeteria and we see little Johnny or Sally sitting all by themselves and basically not being able to connect, and say, you know what, if we could teach our groups to be proactive and turn that into a team, give people a sense of belonging to something more than just the name of a high school, but the group of people that are in that high school. And our guys can do that because they know what it takes to be in a team. They know what it's like to have to come back from adversity, or be able to talk with each other at a real level. When you're on a team, a football team, you certainly have to be able to tell people, hey, you might not be starting the game, but you're really important to what goes on here. Everybody plays a role. And who can better say that than the athletes that we had here at WashU, to be able to talk to all these various high schools. And the project went well. We partnered with the Jason Foundation and let them know we're not going to go in and talk about suicide and depression, but what we are going to do is talk about team building and how you can maybe bring people into the group that might feel right now isolated or alone. And it's been quite an endeavor over the years. It's taken us to a lot of places and got us into some very deep conversations. And And our guys have a really neat way of doing it. It isn't just the message, it's the way the message is delivered through our players that makes it really special.
Yeah, I think what's really, and not to use the word you just used, but what's really special about what you've done and what you are a part of is, for those of you that don't know the schedule of a football coach, you don't have a lot of free time, right? Even in the off season. And when you're coaching at a college level, it's even more demanding. And so you were able to do this in the time that you had and get so many other people involved. And, I know there were times where you've had an impact. I know there were times where it missed the mark, where it could have been more, but maybe people didn't understand what was going on. So what I want to say to you is, I don't know that you have any idea how many people's lives you probably saved, but if just one, I mean, I think your efforts were worth it. But it isn't necessarily them, but it's the lives that they went on to touch. So do you have any particular success stories or things that you can share, someone that's come back to you? And obviously we want to be respectful and not use names unless you have permission to use names, but any success stories from the program that you can share?
Well, first of all, I have one big success story from being able to learn from this, and it's been me. We always have thought, especially in the coaching profession, we're all about relationships. Now, most people look at us and say, well, winning is everything. And it's like, no, not really. We want to win. I mean, that's part of a mission of what a team likes to do. They want to be successful. And when you play a sport, winning is part of what it means to be successful. But what really is the underlying factor are the relationships that you have and you build. And through this process, what we've seen is the very thing that we're talking about to these high school groups about building within their own school a team kind of a framework is something that every time our own athletes have talked about that and have listened to the high school, because it's a two-way street. We're learning from them as they're learning from us. They're building a relationship. When you listen to people, there's a relationship that's built. Everybody wants to belong. Everybody wants to be a part of something. And a lot of reason for the mental health. And I know it boils down to a lot of things, the chemistry in the brain, and every story is unique on why people fall away from, relationships with other people. But the bottom line is relationships are the one thing that can open the door that may end up making a difference in terms of the way somebody wakes up every morning and the way somebody feels like they're a part of something. So how blessed was I to be part of a group and listening to high school and college students talk back and forth about some very real stuff, feeling lonely or feeling out of it, or recognizing that somebody else is out of it. But what do I do? What do I say? And to have people come to a conclusion that sometimes it's just a matter of saying, hey, what's up, to somebody who's sitting all by themselves, and you mind if I just sit down with you and get to know you a little bit? And knowing that has totally maybe changed somebody's life. So relationships are important. And I've always felt my role as a coach, my definition of a coach is somebody who's going to take somebody else, somebody who's going to be coached, to some place that they may not have gotten themselves. So it doesn't say anything about winning. It doesn't say anything about making you necessarily a better person, no judgments on character, but taking you someplace that you kind of want to go, but maybe you can't get there by yourself. And what happens then is, as we think we're coaching those kids are also coaching us. And they take their messages back into their schools, and we would give them homework assignments and we'd leave them after 2.5 hours and, high-fiving each other. And they feel good about the fact that they just spent 2.5 hours talking about how they can make their own school better and doing it with things that they know, the template of being part of a team. And, so when you ask me, there are specific examples. Yeah, we had when we were going through the whole thing with Ferguson, Our players met with the Berkeley football team, Ferguson, that most of us can look back, and we all have different memories of what that whole incident has taught us as people and as a country. But what I saw was an engagement of people at Washington University on our football team meeting with these high school kids, and really the relationship that was built, the conversation, the dialogue that took place earned both groups a greater understanding of what the other group was going through, all with the purpose of how can you make your school a better school at a time when most people wouldn't think those are the big issues there. It's like it's an issue for every high school kid in America. Nobody wants to see somebody sit by themselves in the in the cafeteria, right? Nobody wants to see themselves be around somebody who's depressed, or maybe even getting the story that somebody's taken their own life. And how do you do that without talking about that directly? And for me, it has been, well, you build a template of relationships within your school where people want to be a part of that school. And how cool is that? Washington University, Berkeley High School at the time, and we're not talking politics, we're not talking racial division, we're not talking, how do you feel about those things as much as we're talking about, how are you doing, man? I mean, how are you really doing? And
Right.
having people open up and say, hey, I just want to be good. I want to be successful. Or one young man in that group who says, I just want to go to school and play football and be around my friends. And it's like, yeah, isn't that kind of what school is all about? Not necessarily football, but being able to do the extracurricular stuff with your friends and just being there and having a good time as you're learning. So that's been my take on it, Jim. But it's been great, and I think the message about depression and suicide, mental health, then becomes part of those conversations because people can talk about them being real.
Well, and I think it's really amazing that again, searching for the right words, the growth, the increased awareness around mental health and teenage depression and suicide is really, in the last 5 years or so, it's really expanded quite a bit. And there's an understanding around it, not enough of an understanding around it, but you guys were really ahead of your time and aware of what was going on before it became mainstream to understand those things. So I want to ask you one last question, and we went long. I apologize. We try and keep these 8 to 10 minutes, but your content has been amazing, and the things that you're sharing are so relevant. And I'm hoping that somebody sees this and hears what they need to hear. But for those that might hear your story, Larry, and think, man, I wish I could do something. And they think, well, I'm not a big football coach, or I don't have the money, or I don't have the time. I think everybody has the ability to do something. And I'd like for you to share, just in the last 30 seconds that we have here, for somebody that might be inspired by you, how can they take some action, like today or tomorrow, but in the immediate future? What's your words of wisdom?
Well, I'd say when you're walking down the street and you're passing somebody, you don't look down at the ground. You don't look off in the distance. You maybe give a second of your time or a piece of your heart, be able to say hello. How are you? Who knows? That might make a difference. Being able to smile and not be thinking about politics and I know all the different things that we feel affect us right now, but actually look at somebody and in that short amount of time, be able to build the kind of relationship, as shallow as it may seem, but a smile does a lot. And positive mental attitude, those things to me are all very, very important when you do engage in conversation. So people look at that and say, wow, that just made me feel better about what goes on. And that's really what we did in a much more structured way, I guess. But be aware of your fellow man. Right?
That's amazing. Larry, again, I think you shared this. Let me end on this note. You said one of the best success stories from this program was you. And I will tell you, when we made the decision to put out Changemakers, and I sit on the board for ReVitalize, so it's a very personal thing for me to tell some of these stories. I think I shared with you, and I've shared with our audience previously, that the Ferguson incident was one of the reasons why I wanted to help paint St. Louis in a better light, which is why I joined what was at the time ReVitalize St. Louis, and now it's expanded to a more global presence. But for me, hearing stories like yours and seeing people like you is why I wanted to be involved. So I just want to say thank you for being on here, and thanks for inspiring me and undoubtedly others listening. So thank you.
Well, thank you and Larry for all you guys have done. And again, all you're doing is bringing things up to the surface. You're doing the same thing that I just got done. When you asked me one thing I can recommend, what you're doing is you're opening the door for people to have relationships and to be able to grow. Here's your mindset, your growth mindset, to be able to grow as a person. And I thank you for that. I think that's absolutely awesome. So appreciate what you do.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to sitting down and having a Diet Dr. Pepper and a Diet Coke with you at some point in the near future. But guys, stay tuned. Larry, thank you again. We've got more Changemakers coming up. If you like what you heard, make sure you get a chance to visit our website. There's some information on there that you can find on Larry and how to get involved. So thanks again so much for being on here, and more Changemakers coming up right now.
Thank you, Jim.